Why the FAA killed the best piston engine. America ever built. Teardown is already in progress when the mechanic finds it. He pulls the oil filter, cuts it open, and holds it under the shop light. The paper is full of fine gray particles, metallic, magnetic, catching the light like ground pepper. He knows what it means before he runs the magnet across it. That cam is eating itself. 800 on this engine. A man flew this plane twice a month for 6 years, kept it hangared, changed the oil on schedule. The logbook is clean. The airplane looks fine from the outside. Underneath the cowling, in a design that has not changed since Harry Truman was president, the camshaft has been slowly destroying itself every week the plane sat on the ramp. The bill for what comes next is $26,000 before they find anything else wrong. That is the entry price, before they split the case, before they check the crank, before the parts list starts building. Consider what this engine's owner profile actually looks like. FAA data puts the active private pilot population at roughly 174,000 people. Most of them fly fewer than 100 hours a year. A significant number fly far less, a weekend trip here, a fly-in there, a handful of touch and goes to stay current. These are not pilots who neglect their airplanes. They are pilots who live normal lives, hold jobs, have families, and fly when time allows. Lycoming architecture was designed in an era when general aviation was a working industry. In 1978, the United States shipped 17,811 new general aviation aircraft in a single year. Pilots flew because flying was part of the economic landscape: crop dusting, charter, freight, instruction. Those engines accumulated hours. They stayed wet. The fleet that flies today is not that fleet. It is older, it flies less, and it sits more. The cam geometry designed for working pilots operating working aircraft is now installed in airplanes flown by weekend owners, averaging 50 to 80 hours a year. The failure pattern is not a defect in those owners. It is a mismatch between an architecture and the world it ended up serving. That mismatch has a price. That mechanic has seen this before. He will see it again. The failure pattern is not a mystery. It is not bad luck. It is geometry, and the people who could have changed it chose not to. This is the story of why. If you want to know what your engine is actually doing when it sits in the hangar, subscribe to Sky Ranch. We read the teardown reports so you do not have to find out on the ramp. The Lycoming camshaft sits above the oil line. That is not a metaphor. It is a physical fact of the engine's layout that has existed in every version of this architecture since the 1940s. When a Lycoming sits for 1 week, 2 weeks, or a month, the oil drains down into the sump. The crankshaft journals stay wet. The rod bearings stay wet. The cam lobes elevated above the primary oil splash zone dry out. They sit exposed to moisture from condensation and to acid from combustion. Blow-by gases soaking into the case. Almost no protective film covers the highest stress contact surface in the bottom end. An engine that flies several times a week keeps everything bathed in circulating oil. The cam sees constant fresh lubrication. Corrosion never gets a foothold. An engine that flies twice a month, the way a large share of general aviation aircraft are actually operated, lives in a different world. Between each flight, moisture attacks the dry cam lobes. Pitting begins. The lobe profile changes. The tappet body that rides against it starts to spall, the surface fractures and flakes, generating the metallic particles that end up in the oil filter. The FAA's own advisory bulletin on this, Advisory Bulletin number 85014, names it directly. Tappet body and hydraulic lifter contact surface failures are commonly attributed to corrosion pitting from infrequent flight activity, particularly in moisture-laden environments without adequate engine preservation. The bulletin tells mechanics to inspect oil filters for fine metallic particles at every oil change as an early warning of cam and tappet degradation. The FAA published that bulletin. Mechanics read it. The engine shipped with the cam in the same position. Aviation Consumer interviewed engine shops across the industry about the cam failure trend. Bill Middlebrook at Penn Yan Aero described the cam rejection rate shifting from approximately 1 in 20 first-run engines to closer to 1 in 7. He sent in scrapped cams and spalled lifters to make the point physical. A brand new camshaft failed in Penn Yan's own test cell. A lobe wiped before the first 100 hours of operation. Not a worn cam on a neglected airplane. A new one, straight from the manufacturer. Shops disagreed on the exact mechanism. One unnamed owner did a metallurgical evaluation and traced the problem to the tappet material, not the cam profile. Others pointed at the cam position in the case. Either way, every shop agreed on this. The failure pattern has been building for years. Neither Lycoming nor the FAA has published a quantified answer on whether it is getting better or worse. Good mechanics learned to read the filter early before the damage got expensive. A mechanic who cuts the filter paper and sweeps a magnet through the drain oil at every change catches this while it is still a cam job. The owner who trusts the oil interval schedule without the physical inspection finds out at teardown. By then, the damage has spread to the case. The labor clock is already past 40 hours. That gap between what a sharp mechanic catches and what a standard inspection requires is one of the most expensive gaps in general aviation. The architecture creates it. The architecture has not changed because changing it costs more than any competitor could justify. What the FAA did publish in October 2024 was an Airworthiness Directive covering approximately 16,000 Lycoming engine models manufactured between January 2009 and February 2017. Not antique engines, not a vintage fleet, recent production built and sold to pilots within the last 15 years. The failure mode, connecting rod bushing failures leading to uncontained engine failures and in-flight shutdowns. Engines coming apart in the air. The estimated compliance cost across the US fleet, $17.31 million, $3.76 million for oil inspections, $1.36 million for bushing inspections, $12.19 million for the replacements those inspections require, $17 million, one Airworthiness Directive. Engines built in this decade, on top of the cam failures that have been pulling money out of owners' accounts for 30 years. The architecture did not change. The bills kept arriving. The pilots who own these airplanes keep writing the checks. And here is what the Airworthiness Directive math never shows: the overhaul acceleration effect. When an engine gets partially opened for an Airworthiness Directive teardown, cylinders pulled, case inspected, bushings replaced, shops are looking at everything. At the cam, at the crank. A partially disassembled mid-time engine that reveals additional damage does not get reassembled cheaply. The technician pulls 3 cylinders and finds corrosion on the cam lobes. Now the owner faces a decision the Airworthiness Directive never mentioned. Stop with the minimum Airworthiness Directive compliance and reassemble around a cam that is already degrading. Or go further, spend the money while the engine is open and commit to a full overhaul at mid-time with none of the hours that would normally justify it. That is the overhaul acceleration trap. The Airworthiness Directive triggers it. The architecture makes it possible. The owner pays for it. Which bothers you more, that the failure pattern was known or that nothing structurally changed? Tell us below, and if Sky Ranch is new to you, subscribe now. We do not soften this material. The mechanic in that hangar is not making a political argument. He is reading what the oil filter tells him. The filter does not care about type certificates or rulemaking timelines. What the filter cannot tell him is why the architecture was never required to change. That answer sits in the economics of a certification system that made innovation cost more than the market would support: Lycoming and Continental. 2 companies, one basic architecture between them: horizontally opposed, air-cooled, valve-in-head, cam-in-block. The design dates to the late 1930s and early 1940s. The engines powering the overwhelming majority of certified Piston aircraft in the United States today are direct descendants of what those two companies built before the Korean War. The FAA knew about corrosion failures in this architecture decades ago. In January 1998, the agency issued an Airworthiness Directive targeting specific Lycoming O320 and O360 series engines. Those are the most common general aviation engines in existence. Investigators traced 4 US crankshaft failures and 10 foreign failures to a single cause: cracks originating from corrosion pits in the crankshaft bore. 3 of the 10 foreign failures resulted in propellers separating from aircraft in flight, not in a hangar. In flight, the 1998 Airworthiness Directive required inspections and treatment coatings. The cam did not move. The basic architecture continued unchanged because changing it would have triggered a recertification process that costs more than most competitors could survive. The FAA. Part 23 certification, the pathway for a new type certificated general aviation aircraft or engine, costs approximately $25 million. That figure came from the FAA's own Aviation Rulemaking Committee in December 2016. The committee concluded that current certification costs inhibit the introduction of new technology. Those are the FAA's words about the FAA's own process. The committee identified prescriptive certification requirements, design mandates written for manufacturing methods from the 1940s as the primary structural barrier to bringing new technology to market. For comparison, light sport. Aircraft certification under ASTM consensus standards costs approximately $150,000. The same federal agency runs both systems. That gap is not a paperwork difference. It is a wall that keeps every serious new entrant out of the certified aircraft market unless they can sustain a $25 million investment across a multi-decade development timeline. Lycoming and Continental sit on the inside of that wall. Their type certificates were issued generations ago. The certification overhead is history. Every Airworthiness Directive, AD, that they absorb is painful, but it does not threaten the franchise. Every company that wanted to build something better started on the outside. DeltaHawk Engines set up in Racine, Wisconsin in 1996 and built something the general aviation market had not seen: an opposed piston diesel aircraft engine on a clean sheet, liquid-cooled, running on jet fuel, 40% fewer moving parts than comparable engines, 35 to 40% better fuel efficiency, no mixture control, no carburetor ice, no shock cooling, direct drive, capable of burning the jet fuel available at every airport on Earth instead of the leaded gasoline the Environmental Protection Agency ruled a public health hazard in 2023. DeltaHawk ran its first prototype in 1997. The FAA certified the DHK-180 on April 7, 2023. 26 years from first run to type certificate. Not because the engine did not work, because the certification pathway treated a small Wisconsin company the same way it treats a major manufacturer and charged accordingly. DeltaHawk describes the DHK-180 as the first clean-sheet piston engine design FAA, certified in over 60 years. 60 years. The Apollo program ran and ended inside that gap. The internet was built inside that gap. The jet engine went from experimental to carrying every commercial flight on Earth inside that gap. The piston architecture in most certified general aviation aircraft did not meaningfully change. General Aviation Modifications Inc. ran a parallel timeline on the fuel side. George Brawley and his team in Ada, Oklahoma, spent 12 years developing G100UL, a drop-in unleaded replacement for 100LL aviation gasoline. The FAA approved it in September 2022 with a fleet-wide supplemental type certificate. Brawley told the crowd at Sun and Fun that they were done, and that they had fixed the problem. As of early 2025, G100UL is commercially available at 3 airports in the United States. The 4 major fuel distributors received invitations to begin transporting it. As of mid-2023, none had made arrangements. Cirrus Aircraft, the best-selling certified piston manufacturer, issued a service advisory recommending against using G100UL in SR series aircraft. A California judge ruled the fuel did not meet the legal standard required to force FBOS to carry it. The fuel works. The system does not move it. A factory, new 6-cylinder Lycoming today costs over $100,000. A field overhaul on the same engine runs $30,000 to $60,000, plus whatever the teardown finds. A factory rebuild on exchange costs $58,000 to $88,000. Budget $5,000 to $10,000 more for firewall forward work after that. That is the price of an architecture that has not faced meaningful competition in a generation. DeltaHawk now has a contract to power the Piper Seminole DX. Piper and DeltaHawk have FAA certification of that airframe targeted for the third quarter of 2026. Piper is evaluating DeltaHawk for the PA-28 and the PA-46. In San Diego, Acates Power builds opposed piston diesel engines for commercial trucks. That proves, in a high-volume civilian market, what DeltaHawk proved for aviation. The design was always sound, the wall was not. The mechanic who cut that filter open does not need to know about Racine or Ada or the December 2016 Federal Register. He knows what the filter tells him. He has been reading that same story for 30 years. Between the gray particles in the filter paper and the type certificate on the wall, a system made a set of decisions. It decided that $25 million was the price of entry for a new idea. It decided that 4 fuel distributors declining to transport an approved product was not a problem it needed to solve. It decided that a cam sitting above the oil line was acceptable because fixing it required recertification, and recertification cost more than any competitor could justify. Those were not engineering decisions, they were economic ones. The pilots at the bottom of that chain pay for all of it, in teardown bills, in compliance costs, and in 60 years of innovation that American general aviation never built. If you own a Lycoming-powered aircraft, one question: did your pre-buy mention the KM position, or did you find out some other way? Leave that below. And subscribe to Sky Ranch for the kind of analysis that does not show up in the owner's manual.